Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mad Scientist Brewing Beer Education Series. And today's episode, in following up with our talk last week about yeast, we're going to be taking a look at a very yeasty beer style called Saison. Anyone who's familiar with Belgian beers knows that Saison and any Belgian beer has a very funky flavor. A lot of that is derived from yeast and fermentation character. So I figured it was an appropriate one to talk about for uh, following up with the yeast video. So uh, here is my Saison. This is Omegang Hennepin. It's an American version of a Saison, but it's actually very true to style and delicious. So cheers, first of all. Hmm. All right, so let's start off with some of the vitals for this style of beer. So most Belgian styles don't fit neatly into style classifications when they're brewing over there. They just kind of brew what it is that they know, and others have tried to do their best to classify those. As a consequence, Saison is kind of the more weird of those because it has such a variety of different alcohol levels and colors. I'll talk about that a bit in the history, but just to take a look at this, this is from the Brewers Association and the BJCP guidelines for what they would classify it to style as a Saison. So for ABV, you're looking at anywhere from table strength, which is 3.5%, all the way up to 9.5%. So a range of low to high. For OG, it can be 1.048 to 1.065. Actually, disregard those Plato numbers. I forgot to update those. I'll make a correction in the video here. Final gravity is 1.002 to 1.008. You'll notice that's actually quite low, keeping in mind that 1.000 is just straight water. So this is fermenting basically almost everything that's in there and will give you a very dry beer. For bitterness, IBUs, it's 20 to 35 and a perceived bitterness of moderate. And for color, you can get anywhere from light colored, uh, like a light gold, all the way up to amber in color. So that's a 5 to a 22 on the SRM scale. All right, so for our sensory notes, starting with appearance, it can have a pale gold to a deep amber color, sometimes even pale orange. It's got a very long-lasting, dense, rocky white to ivory head with characteristic Belgian lace. I've only just started to drink this, but you'll see as I'm going through, you'll have a what they call Belgian lace, where you have the foam making a very nice laced pattern all the way down the glass. It's an unfiltered style, so clarity is poor to good, and may even be hazy. It's very effervescent, and the darker versions can be copper to dark brown in color. For aroma, it has a very pleasant aromatic mix of fruity, spicy yeast and hop aroma. Now, the fruity esters are usually moderate to high and often have citrus fruit, palm fruit, or stone fruit character to them. It has low to moderately high spicy notes, often like black pepper. That's usually one of the characteristic phenolic aroma and flavor is black pepper, which is kind of unique to Saison, and that comes from the yeast for there. Hop aroma is low to moderate and can be spicy, floral, earthy, or fruity, basically your continental or noble hops. The malt is often overshadowed, but it can be lightly grainy, usually using Pilsner malt. And spices and herbs are optional. Some styles use them. Hennepin here has spices, but that should not dominate the overall aroma or the flavor. Speaking of flavor, it's pretty much the same as the aroma. You have this nice balance of fruity and spicy yeast with some hoppy bitterness and grainy malt with a very moderate to high bitterness and a very dry finish, where almost all of the sugars have attenuated out. The fruity and spicy aspects are more prominent, and hop flavor is low to medium with similar characteristics to the aroma. It's very highly attenuated, so it shouldn't be sweet or heavy at all. And spice and herbs are optional, but they have to be in harmony with the yeast if used. And then again, for the darker versions of Saison, it'll have a bit more malt character that typically comes from using the darker malts to add some flavor there. For mouthfeel, it's very light to medium low in body, and very highly carbonated and effervescent. When I first poured this, it actually overflowed the glass a bit because I mean you had a good 3 or more inches of rocky head on here. It's going to be light alcohol warming sometimes. It's optional, depending, especially if you have the really super strength saisons. And those stronger versions can also have a bit more body to them and have that alcohol warming. All right. So for characteristic ingredients for saison, it's usually going to use pale base malt and cereal grains like wheat, oats, spelt, or rye. As I'll touch in the history, this was a beer that was brewed by farmers, and they would use whatever local grains or ingredient, typically what they were growing on their farms. It may also contain sugary adjuncts to boost strength and keep body light, because usually this can have a very high ABV and finishes at a very low gravity, and to keep it dry and have that level of alcohol to it. Sugar is a frequent addition to Saison as well as other strong Belgian beers. For hops, you're looking at continental hops like Hallertauer or Saaz, and a spicy, fruity Belgian Saison yeast is kind of the characteristic defining trait of Saison is this wild, funky yeast that originally just kind of got picked up from the air in the Belgian farm country. All right, so going to the history of the style, it originated in Wallonia, which is the French-speaking part of Belgium. Before brewing moved on to monasteries and eventually got industrialized in cities, all brewing was done in households and on farms. And those farms utilized the grains that were grown locally. Saisons were brewed seasonally in the fall and the spring, and used to quaff the people who were working in the fields in the summer. Saison actually is French for the word season, so that comes from the fact that it was a seasonal beer style. So whereas most beer nowadays, I mean, you're drinking it with a bit of, not, I don't want to say just to get drunk, but you're drinking it with the expectation that you're gonna be feeling it. Back then, it was not high strength at all. It was really meant just to be completely refreshing for the people working in the fields. As brewing became modernized, the style started to become a little less popular and almost died out entirely as brewing moved into the cities, and especially with the advent of lager beers, those kind of took over. The best known modern Saison is Saison du Pont. That was first produced in the 1920s using a lot of the old techniques and started a bit of a revival of the style. Although nowadays it's got this farmhouse rustic association with it, and it's romantic to think about. However, the style is pretty much made on an industrial scale at this point, except for a few small cases. If you're looking at comparing this with other styles, the pale and standard strength is like a more highly attenuated and hoppy Belgian blonde ale, but with stronger yeast character. Higher strength pales are similar to the Belgian triple, but have more of a grain and rustic character and a bit of a spicier yeast character. And sorry, this is one of my favorite styles, and I haven't had one in a bit, so I'm enjoying this video. Some commercial examples. I mentioned Saison du Pont, also Ommegang Hennepin, which I'm currently drinking. Some other ones are Boulevard Tank 7, and here in Maine, Allagash Saison and Oxbow's Farmhouse Ale, which are just up the road for me and my first exposure to Saison styles. There are quite a few good examples brewed here in the US, and even ones imported from Belgium to the US. But I suppose you'd have to want to get to the source if you can. I'm hoping to get to Belgium one day to be able to try some of these right where they came from, although not necessarily in the farmland. All right, I feel like I've rambled on enough about Saisons, but I did want to pick this style in particular because I'm trying to focus on some yeast-forward things this month. And this is probably, of any beer style I can think of, this is the one that involves yeast the most. So with that, I will continue to drink this. And until next time, cheers.